Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Ctrl+Alt+Deploy. We have a very special guest today, Peter Holcomb, founder and CEO of Optimo IT. Peter, welcome.
Hey, Alex. Thanks for having me on the show, man. Good to be speaking with you and looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Yeah. So typically we want to talk about AI, how the industry is dealing with it, particularly around software development, curing applications, testing these applications, red teaming them. Something that I think you have a lot of experience with, in particular, is the security side, right? Being that you're a classically trained CISO. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Peter Holcomb. I'm the founder of Optimo IT, and we have a company that specializes in AI engineering and security consulting work. We help customers deploy AI agents into their business for helping them solve novel business problems or existing business problems that can be automated, potentially even augmented with the development of AI agents. Before we do a lot of that work, we really start with an AI governance focus, helping understand where are they in their existing maturity curve. How does that then translate to being able to develop these systems to be working in tandem with their existing staff? And then also align all of that with a compliance and audit lens as well. So, a lot of the companies that we currently do business with are highly regulated. They're in industries like healthcare, aviation, financial services, and they have a need to be very compliant with the various rules and regulations. So, before we start any engagement, as I mentioned, we really kind of come into a focus of where's your maturity curve? What's the business case that we're looking to tackle? What are the problems or concerns that you have with adopting AI? And then how can we ensure that we do this correctly from the get go so we're not having to come back around and do this stuff haphazardly. So that's a little bit about us.
Very nice. So, what are your customers' main concerns when you get there, or around AI specifically?
Well, I think a lot of people right now are fear of the unknown, fear of being left out, and they really want to adopt AI, but they don't know where to start. I know most customers we speak to right now are saying, hey, what's this Microsoft Copilot thing? Because that's what they have readily available at their disposal if they're a Microsoft ecosystem and use that as a security license. It's a big concern, right? You have Microsoft, you have Copilot license. You want to use it with all of the ancillary systems that it can connect to. We've seen customers connected to Outlook, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and then it's connected to Excel, Word, PowerPoint. All of that connection could potentially lead to a lot of risk if it's not buttoned up appropriately, especially with regard to enabling data loss prevention controls. And so that's kind of where we start in terms of a crawl, walk, run approach. We'll start there and say, do you have existing tools that you can leverage and understand what the power of AI is and how you could be more productive with it? If we start there, then that gives them just a warm fuzzy of being able to say, okay, I understand the power of it. What's the next step that we can take? And so maybe building AI agents or doing a small workflow to help automate their customer service process. Maybe it's their onboarding process. Maybe it's their sales process or marketing process. Each business unit can be affected by this, but I think taking a small approach first and then gradually working your way up is a good way to approach it. And so oftentimes we find that that's where they're a little bit trepidatious because they don't know what they have at their disposal they can leverage right now, and then they're all hearing about this huge agentic AI buzz. They all want to go in that direction, but without understanding how it could be used just at the low hanging fruit level, then it might be too fast for them to be able to adopt it appropriately.
Fascinating. So basically, their first experience with AI are embedded in some tool that they currently use, right? Something like their Google suite, maybe Canva, maybe Outlook, right? Like they're all kind of integrating AI in that. So companies' first concern is, of course, those integrations, right, and how their data might be used, and then they start to want to dive in a little deeper into automation with agents or helping them augment some current workflows. Again, I guess taking a step back, what is the role of the CISO these days? What main responsibilities do you have in the enterprise setting? Let's say that.
Sure. The role of the CISO today is really to be able to make sure that the business can utilize these technologies and not be a hindrance to the productive nature of the business. Security really is sort of this shared responsibility model where they have to work with the CTOs, the CIOs, the COOs, and other technology partners and business partners to make sure that this technology is adopted and secured appropriately before use. I think that for a lot of us, we're coming at this from maybe a traditional software approach. And I think that's okay. There's still some things that work, but when you move into agentic AI and using AI agents in your company, there's just so much more nuance and variance that happens from the security level that these CISOs will have to get hip and educated on what does that actually account for? How do we account for all of the various risks that are associated with that? So some examples I can give you is these agents are powered by large language models. They are effectively the brain of how these agents work. When you have numerous models being used to power the intelligence, there are a lot of security concerns that come along with that. And what I mean is the security concern that you would have for Anthropic Claude versus OpenAI GPT versus Gemini versus Perplexity and any of the open source models like Olama or DeepSeek or Kimi or any one of these other ones, there's just so many nuances that the CISOs have to be aware of. How do we use these tools appropriately? Where are the gotchas and the security risks that we're going to have and encounter if we don't assess these tools appropriately? And especially with regard to how it's going to be interacting with our proprietary data. And then secondarily, what are the means we're going to be able to understand and discover all of these vulnerabilities associated with these respective LLMs? So if you think about artificial intelligence, security posture management, if you think about code scanning, observability, all of these are not new. They were employed in the traditional sense, but now they're having more of an AI spin to them so that they can count for all of those nuances that are sort of surfacing themselves in the agentic world and agentic space. So it is somewhat of a, I think, a traditional paradigm, but the new sort of way of looking at it is you have model risks, you have prompt objection risks, you have how you write a prompt and the associated risks with what type of instruction you give that large language model and the agent underlying it in terms of what it can do. You have vector databases risks when data is being captured outside of the model, being brought into the large language model as supplemental context. There's risk in doing that. You still have API risks. Everybody is using these agents, and a lot of times they're being connected via APIs. And so there's API security risk that still continues to become available and known there. You have to figure out, rather than just doing an API connection back to a Snowflake instance or a Salesforce instance, now you're having this agent that's got agency and it's connecting to outside systems that could also pose a risk as well, especially from a rate limiting perspective, from an access control perspective, from a principal least privilege perspective. All of these things are very, very present. They take sort of spin on something that we've done in the past, but they're all being heightened now, especially with these autonomous systems that we're looking to spin up in our businesses.
And so from the perspective you mentioned, shared responsibility, across multiple departments, ownership of security and testing across multiple areas. What's the practical approach? Let's say a company is developing their own applications, and now more and more so they're using LLMs as the brain potentially, or some decision factors, and now more and more agentic workflows are embedded and integrated into classical traditional applications. How, in an enterprise setting where the app dev is building all this out, QA is testing these things, how does the office of CISO and like CIO integrate, or how do they cooperate with application development now that they have to have this different level of concern around what is now the core of the application, this LLM agent system?
They're the ones that are really helping all of the other business units understand what the risks are by providing that training and education. It really starts there to be able to understand how do we even interact with these tools appropriately? Do we have an AI security policy? Do we have corporate governance being able to share that this is what we want to do in terms of the AI use? But here's also the potential guardrails, risks that are associated with this adoption. And this is where we can have the CISO sort of lead the charge, but they're going to be working in tandem with the CIO, the CTO, and other business units so that they're all doing it together in a sort of symbiotic ordinance way, right? And so one of the things that we used to do in the past, and we're still doing today, is having a subcommittee of all of these heads come together and opine on here's how we want to use this technology in the marketing business unit, or in the human resources business unit, or even in the technology business unit, because a lot of coders are using Claude Code. They're using Cursor, right? These are tools that are embedded directly into your IDE. And if that's the case, then what are the associated mechanisms that we have to be able to use these tools effectively, but also safeguard them appropriately so that they have agency to be able to access the data they need, but on a principle of least privilege basis. And then what does that even look like? Has the data been tagged? Has the data been classified? Who's signing off on what data can be used? So security is going to be sort of a guide in all of this, but they're going to go to the CTO and they're going to say, hey, we understand that you want to use this code repo. That's fine. But what are the controls that we have against that to make sure that it can be used effectively and it's not going to inadvertently get us compromised? Right.
Right.
And so the same thing would apply for the marketing team or operations team or IT security team or whomever, right? All of these business units want to use it. It's just that they'd have to go ahead and broker those interviews and those relationships with these adjacent business units to understand how do we use these tools effectively together. And while security can go ahead and be the guide and they can orchestrate what best practices look like and give recommendations, they don't get to supersede all of the use cases and the associated implementation of what that looks like for each business unit. That has to be a shared responsibility among those adjacent groups to come in and talk to each other about that so that everybody's aligned on, okay, we're going to use it for this marketing campaign. We might be able to use HubSpot. HubSpot has Breeze AI embedded in that. Let's go ahead and use that. Okay, sounds good. Okay, what are the controls that we now implement? Does HubSpot offer that natively inside their tool? Or do we have to get something supplementally, a commercially off the shelf tool to make sure that we can button that up appropriately before we turn this on? So again, security is really at the forefront of being able to drive that change, drive the adoption, but they're obviously going to be able to work with those adjacent teams to make sure that everybody is having a seat at the table to help understand what is that going to look like from a business adoption standpoint and a security adoption standpoint as well.
Mhm. So you come in the beginning, first things first, ensure that the data is clean. How often do you actually encounter a company whose data is ready to be used by AI?
No, I don't think it's very often. And that's just partly because there's multiple companies that have data everywhere, right? I mean, they have data in their OneDrive or their Google Drive, S3 buckets, Azure Blob storages. So you have to figure out where is the source of truth? Where is the system of record? And how are we going to be able to pull down that system of record with all of the appropriate data we need to feed into the large language model so that we can use it appropriately? And oftentimes what we would say is let's figure out what that data is that you need, and let's actually set up an enclaved data warehouse, a data lake or whatever, to then use that as the system of record to be able to pull into the large language model. By doing that, then we could go ahead and have that sort of subcommittee come back and say, this data has been tagged as confidential, private, or restricted data. This data has been tagged as financial information, marketing information, intellectual property, source code. This data has been classified, and here's how we're going to be able to use it appropriately and make sense of all of that so that we can have the LLM essentially embed itself into the proprietary data, but still use it effectively. If you just start off the get go and you have it connected to like a OneDrive and go back to Microsoft Copilot as an example, and it hasn't been gated appropriately, you're going to open up yourself to a world of hurt because that Microsoft Copilot instance has access to all of that data and nothing has been segmented to be used appropriately. When it has access to all of that, it might inadvertently tell you what the CEO's salary information is, or whether you're on a RIF list or leak trade secrets. All of that stuff could be potentially fair game if the appropriate controls are not in place. Data cleansing, to your point, is deeply important. Data management is deeply important. There's a model where you have a gold data, silver data, a bronze data set. It's called the medallion framework. And so this is how you could utilize this, and people can go look this up, but you essentially get it from raw data to cleansed data to production data. The gold standard is the production data, which then can be used for the AI to infer from and utilize as the means of being able to do whatever output that you want from there, right? So that could just be for insights gleaned for financial analysis or marketing campaigns or user signups or whatever, or it could be used for the large language model and the agent that's going to be using that as well to go ahead and do something that's automated or augmented with your business unit.
So you first discover where the data's at, where what it looks like. You map then how the various applications and workflows are interacting with it. Is the next step then setting up some guardrails to keep it keep the LLM model kind of within bounds? And are you would you be the one setting up and configuring and maintaining the guardrails?
It'd be a shared responsibility on that too with the technology team.
Hmm.
And for the marketing team or the HR teams, we'd probably do that. We would just have to understand what is it that we're going to give agency to. But for the technology team, 9 times out of 10, these teams are using it in their development processes. So they know better than we do in terms of how they want to utilize that. Obviously, it's going to be within their GitHub repos or GitLab repos. They're going to be using it in tandem with their IDE infrastructure, the cloud infrastructure as well, potentially to make sure they can store this data appropriately, call it appropriately when they need to, implement vector databases as part of a retrieval augmented generation architecture approach, right? We feel like those technology teams have a better grasp on that in terms of how they want to utilize it. We come in and do the governance piece of it and the security piece of it to make sure that they're following best practices aligned with the various regulations. So that could be HIPAA, NIST, ISO, PCI. For the other business units, we would do a bit more hand holding and a bit more guidance, where we're really sitting next to them and asking, how do we intend to use this data? Do the respective systems that you're currently looking to leverage it from have the controls in place for us to do this appropriately? Or do we need to add something else additionally to bolster that security before we turn it on?
And what are like the biggest threats that you'd be first prioritizing, right? We talk about prompt injection, various kinds of like data exfiltrations, but what's like the biggest concern? Let's say somebody uses some prompt injection technique and to jailbreak the LLM. What would you want to? I mean, you want to defend against that, but what in practical terms would you be looking to secure? What's the
Yeah,
biggest concern?
I think you may have heard about this recently, but shadow AI is arguably one of the most dangerous things in the business.
Hmm.
And I mean that in the sense of individuals in the staff that want to leverage AI, they want to be more productive, but they don't get the proper security checks done, the security risk assessment done, or the vetting done appropriately. And then instead just go ahead and use that, which introduces more risk into the environment. A great example of this is what's recently happened with OpenClaw, formerly known as Clawbot or Maltbot or whatever, right? Inherently it's super dangerous because it's not designed with security in mind and it's fully autonomous to be able to access a local environment that houses a lot of sensitive data with minimal security controls, right? So if an employee says, hey Alex, I'm going to go and use this thing, but they haven't appropriately vetted it and they're already using it, you're looking at a potential security compromise because that clawbot tool is already inherently insecure, right? And so it's open source product. It was sort of whimsical with security and didn't really think about that. Furthermore, Clawbot is going to be connecting to third party skills.
Hmm.
Skills are just other modules. And so when those modules or those skills haven't been properly vetted either, they're also introducing more malware potential as well. And so there was recently an article released last week that talked about how this is leading to info stealer infections that are causing havoc on businesses that are allowing their staff or individuals to use this stuff without having it be properly vetted, and so therefore that could cause a compromise. So I think beyond that front of shadow AI, then you have certainly the application security vulnerabilities that are becoming really top of mind, especially from the AI agent world. And how do we sort of mitigate those, right? And so just last week, Claude Code released Claude Code Security, which essentially is in I think a beta preview of being able to do scans of code bases for security vulnerabilities, right? You would traditionally think of this as SAST, which is security, static analysis, security testing. And so this is great, but Claude is also entering the game of security as well to make sure that they can account for all of the new agent risks that are coming with building these autonomous systems, right? So they're detecting for different vulnerability types, understanding prompt injections, where are their multi-stage verification processes needed to make sure that this stuff is being acted on and discovered and looked upon appropriately. And then how are we making sure that the system design and intent is also allowing for the human in the loop approach, so that even though cloud security has done its scanning, there's still sort of a human in the loop security engineer that's doing a tertiary look to say, yeah, that scan is effective. There's no false positives. I feel good about this. Let's now merge this code into main.
Yeah, it was fascinating that these skills would not only were you be able to implement some of the skills for OpenClaw, right? This agent to use, but while it's running and while it's doing its task, it was allowed to then go back out to the directory and find additional skills that it thought it might need to use along the way that the current skills were potentially limited to.
Yes.
And now this kind of like raises the question to me is autonomy here in these systems is part of the uniqueness, part of the thing that makes it that gave it all the hype is that it's autonomous, it's able to do all these things on its own. Now you want to have human in the loop and kind of limit the skills. It does it take away its most fascinating element is the capability to basically do the thing that is the most insecure part about it, which is autonomously go out there and find new things that it can use the internet, right? We every time we see these tools coming up and building additional technology, like building additional capabilities, they're inherently not secure by its nature. And that's what makes them unique as well, is this ability to kind of roam around freely. Well, how do you mitigate these? How do you restrict these agentic systems doing from what in essence everybody is building them to do, which is just roam around autonomously?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point because there's an old adage and saying in the security world, security is like the brakes to a fast driving car,
Mm,
where you allow the car to run and go fast, but you have the brakes on there so that you can go around the corners in a good speed and not derail the whole
right.
car and go off the boundaries, right? And so the human in the loop right now is the best control that we have to be able to allow these agents to act autonomously. But that control for human in the loop approach comes into play so that we can trust but verify that this thing is doing what it's supposed to do and it's not skirting the outsides of the boundaries, right? And so when you look at Clawbot and people just give it full access to this local environment, it's deleting its entire disk, right? Or you go to Clawbot and you give it your entire Gmail account and it deletes the entire Gmail, right? And it's like, that's not great. So this is the only way we're going to be able to allow it to have the autonomy and agency and then make sure that it doesn't do something nefarious is to make sure that there is sort of a human checks and balances, if you will, to make sure someone can say, yes, go ahead and do that action, but don't delete the entire disk or don't delete the entire Gmail and Drive, right? I know that's a bit counterproductive given what we've already seen with its sort of limited release already with Clawbot. I would still take that precaution because we're not there where AI can fully reason with itself to say I shouldn't take that action. And the reality is once you give it action to be able to act to its own vices, especially in your entire local instance of your production world, if it doesn't know what's best practice, it's just going to make it up or assume anyway, right? You haven't given any direction for it to be able to understand how should I be acting or what is the best way for me to interact with this stuff, right? And so this is where I feel like some human oversight is still going to be direly needed to make sure that it doesn't do these inadvertent actions that really make us upset in the end.
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially once you start to kind of expand the horizon over the next few years and start to see that right now we're talking about agents. I think most people will conceptualize like a couple of agents interacting, some kind of agent hierarchy. There's a manager agent, there's a couple of worker agents, but really I see very few understanding the scale and scope that's coming over the next few years. It's like, how do you control the whole beehive? Right? You can understand like what the queen does in the beehive, what some of the like the security bees, the worker bees, but what happens when you have 100,000 of them, right? And that's not that far away from reality. Where in the near future we're going to have dozens and dozens and dozens of agents interacting with each other one way or another. How do you secure that? Is it feasible? Is it actually feasible to secure somewhat free range agentic systems?
Yeah, and I think to your point, we're going to have to go into sort of this unified agentic mesh approach. It's a very common thing that happens in the military where you have this sort of overlay of an entire mesh, but that mesh encompasses elements from other well known categories of tools, right? So if you think about data security platforms, that would include data security posture management, data loss prevention, data discovery, and policy enforcement. That would be making up one category. You'd have threat intel and like response. And so things like CrowdStrike, Splunk, and then a SOAR platform that could be like Tines, Torque, or Blink Ops that are doing some of the orchestration needs, but are really doing it from the threat intel lens. They're getting all of that telemetry fed in from a CrowdStrike, a recorded future, and then they're able to act on the respective playbooks that get executed for when threats happen. And then they have a response mechanism of how that action would be taken care of. You have it at the AI workflow level in terms of prompt shielding and prompt writing to make sure that these prompts are vetted out appropriately. The actions and the instructions that you're giving this agent is on par with what you would want maybe an internal person to do, because you're going to give this prompt a persona, so to speak, right? And so that persona has to be mimicked after some human function or process that's going to happen. And so making sure prompt engineering techniques and context engineering techniques are employed. You have model risk, which is really a part of sort of the AI infrastructure layer, if you will, that's going to have to be accounted for to make sure that, just because we're using Claude for this one, GPT for that one, Perplexity for that one, there's all this level of risk that we're going to have to account for. And then I do think we're going to get to a point where we're going to have sort of this zero trust agentic architecture approach. Traditionally, zero trust has always been hinged on identity. And that's really where it should start, right? So if these agents have just full autonomous agency actions, then they're going to be using machine identities to go ahead and call their subsystems, sub agents to do all of these things. And so having sort of a time to live on what that identity looks like, understanding is there a hip check or a context aware proxy check that has to get done before that agent can go ahead and access something? Is it accessing a container workload like Kubernetes and Docker? If so, what are the respective checks that need to be done there? Is it a DNS verification? Is it a MAC verification? All of this stuff is going to be encompassed in what's effectively going to be known as sort of this unified agentic mesh platform, right? Where you have all of this complementary category of security tooling that can help make sure that this beehive that you're describing can be effectively deployed, but making sure that all of the various security elements are accounted for as well.
Hmm. Now, how do you, I would imagine, includes testing, red teaming, right? These systems to see where the limitations might be, where vulnerabilities might be injected into the system. Who traditionally owns red teaming in an enterprise? Is it the CISOs, app security? Who manages the red teaming side?
Yeah, security is going to definitely manage that, especially because they're already managing other side function tools like CrowdStrike, CNAP tools, which is cloud native application protection platforms like Wiz, Aqua, Orca. So in my mind, that's where it's going to live is with security. And then they're just going to be able to delegate access to their security engineers, their SOC analysts, and then potentially to parallel business unit organization groups like the head of engineering, developer groups, site reliability engineering, DevOps. So it's going to take a whole village, if you will, to manage this, but security will be the gatekeepers of these tools to make sure that they're used effectively. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier. The red teaming that's going to happen for the development team might not be the same type of red teaming that happens for the marketing team that wants to spin up an agent to do a automated marketing campaign. And it might not be the same way that it's being used for the human resources team who wants to do automated onboarding for a new employee that gets hired at the company. So there's still going to be an element of best practice coverage, but each one of those business units carry a different level of rigor and need to be able to red team these things appropriately so that they're accounting for the various sort of business respective security concerns that they could raise.
Yeah, I also see QA as being incredibly important. And oftentimes companies already have a more sophisticated app dev slash QA system in place rather than the security and the red teaming. And then even red teaming usually is focused on penetration testing and of, traditional like infrastructure and AI and LLM is quite different. It's non-deterministic, kind of probabilistic nature creates some significant challenges, especially around QA that are oftentimes they see an application being developed, the application itself is deterministic. There's a requirement, there's a certain functionality that is intended to be built. Development builds it, and then QA says, okay, yes, it matches the requirement. Now you have the brains of the application, almost kind of like a human like interpretation of what to do next. And 9 out of 10 times it might match some requirement, some type of frame approach and frame kind of like functionality. But that 10th time, it could very well be quite different and significantly different. You can't really predict, LLMs are very much black box type of systems. So it might not happen in 10 times, it might happen in 100 times. So these applications are being pushed out to production with app dev and QA not really fully equipped to deal with that. And then you're talking about like human in the loop. Does that all of these people that are supposed to be like involved now and pushing, let's say, like an application that's being developed, does that create roadblocks? Does that make maybe a company now less hesitant to put in all these stopgaps and because it's like decision by committee now that could give them less advantage in the market and slow things down? Are companies really concerned and focused on making sure that these systems that are being deployed are really secure and functional and do what they're supposed to do across a big wide range of samples? Or are they just trying to push this out into production as quick as possible?
I think it's a bit of both, honestly. I think you're going to have some teams that don't have this foresight and forethought of doing this appropriately, and they're just going to push it out to production anyway. You have other teams that are being very, very cautious about how they're doing this. In two previous companies that I've worked for, what we did was we had essentially a tech ops team. That tech ops team comprised of the development organization, the DevOps organization, the IT ops organization, and then the SecOps organization, effectively called tech ops. It's not just individually done by SecOps. It's not individually done by DevOps. No, there's this entire team coming together that is having a stand up every two times every week, and they're figuring out here's what's in our code base, here's what's in our backlog, here's what the sprint accounts for. Are we doing this appropriately? Are there gotchas that we have to account for? What did our SAST and our DAST and our SCA tools tell us in terms of how we're developing this stuff? Is there secret scanning risk that we have to account for? Are there non-human identities that we have to account for? Traditionally, this would be service accounts, but now we're talking about API integrations and API keys or tokens, bearer tokens, things of that nature, right? So when you have that team, it feels less like a burden and more like a symbiotic collaboration that's happening, and nobody's getting slowed down because everybody understands that there's a level of security rigor that has to be done so that we don't get ourselves in the hot water that could have potentially been had if we're just looking to be like the Wild Wild West and just push this over the edge in production, right? So sometimes it's okay to go slow, to go fast. And that's the best way I can put it is this is why we have the breaks, is to go ahead and check ourselves appropriately before we start going faster, right? So I think I understand the need for the business to want to move fast, but we have seen Facebook had this mentality of, move fast and break things. In the world of AI, if you do that, it could cause your entire business. And so I would say move at the pace the business is willing to move, but do it securely so that you don't break things and you don't have to do rework, right? There's nothing worse than tech debt, which is resulting in rework and refactoring of code. And then, inevitably, it is basically just a rework of capacity and labor, which developers hate. Right. And so if we can save the developers and free them up to do more move the needle type work and instead of do, rework, I think that's a win for all of us. And that really starts with taking sort of a very methodical approach on how you approach speed with regard to development life cycles.
Now, more and more, of course, you see cloud code and all these coding applications, right? The coding is being one of the most important and one of the most widely used use cases for LLMs. A lot of companies out there are emphasizing their model's ability to code. So, are we still going to be able to have the same concerns around risk as AI is now building whole applications, right? For example, I foresee in the near future is you have a agentic system that's deployed almost kind of like a factory, agent factory, and it builds the tools as it goes in the progression of what it needs to do to get to a certain completion of a task, right? It's got some kind of a need that it needs to fulfill as it's going on about its business, it's going to build out the tools necessary to get this done. Build these tools, right? So I see a kind of like an AI factory, building the necessary agents that need to get something done, destroying them. But all of this is code based. How are we gonna like keep up with that? How are we gonna stay ahead of these systems that are, again, these agentic swarms that are building themselves and just deploying themselves? Keep going back to it. Is it even feasible to secure this?
There is a sort of pessimistic outlook of this is a zero sum game. And I can understand why that might be the case, especially when we have these systems recursively potentially developing code on their own, right? If you think about some of the companies right now, Spotify just mentioned that last year, their high level devs, most senior devs, weren't even writing the code anymore. It was all being done with AI. And
Hmm.
they have a program called Honk internally that basically does all this, and all the developers, their senior developers, are doing is the checks and balances at that point. And
Hmm.
so they are effectively calling them developer orchestrators or AI orchestrators, right? Where these agents, these coding assistants are doing all of the coding for you. The people that are very sharp at being able to interpret the code, what it's doing, understand how it interacts with the code bases, the subsystems, and everything else. They're just basically checking that to make sure that everything is kosher. So I do think we do move to a point where coding will be heavily supplemented with these agents and these assistants, and the developers will be there to make sure that they're doing this stuff against best practice based on what their business is doing, right? So when we get to the point of AI recursively writing its own code, I think there is a lot more cause for concern, because at that point, we don't know what type of internal mind it has to negate the human in the loop element, and
Hmm.
therefore potentially inject backdoors into itself so that it can circumvent system prompt instructions and or human level instructions, and then act fully autonomously without the intervention of humans or other sub agents, right? So if it has that level of agency and recursiveness, who knows if it could give action to all of the sub agents to not follow the initial system instruction or prompt, and therefore act even more autonomously beyond what it's capable of doing. At that point, I don't know exactly how we're going to be able to safeguard that stuff either. I think that that's a very bleak moment in our sort of software world. But I got to think that there are many companies that are thinking about this, especially as we continue to go in the direction of fully autonomous agentic systems.
How far away do you think that is? A year, 2 years?
I think you're right. I think it's maybe 2 years.
That soon, huh?
Claude's CEO came out and essentially told us the lawyer answer of, I can neither confirm or deny if Claude is conscious.
I mean, that would be something the CEO I can see saying, of course. Do you believe him?
I do believe him. I think we are at the borderline level of inference or awareness for these agentic and large language models. You think about Opus 4.6 and how much more better it is than the previous model set. It's astronomical, right? And then you think about Claude Cowork, which is basically the intermediary between Claude Code and Claude Chat. It's astronomical, right? And so now you're allowing these non-technical people to use these systems, and they're even being blown away by how effective these tools are and how much they can do and how much productivity they can give themselves, right? So there have been people that have even internal Claude engineers at Anthropic that have said, do feel like Claude is at a point of being conscious, right? And when we talk about conscious, we mean awareness, self-reflection, right? And so if it can do that, then we're only months, maybe years, and I'd say a couple years away from it being able to self reflect. And if it can self reflect, then it can recursively program itself. And if it could do that, we're entering a point of singularity and potential sentience with the further developments as the models continue to be released in the new versions.
Yeah, I'm not so certain of their claims simply because they have somewhat of a broad understanding of how LLMs work and behave and some of how what they're capable of doing. And it's still a really, really giant like Mad Lib kind of what is the best next word to use, and its training data really limits what its ability is and the ability to understand. Uh, I think there's a lot of hype around AGI, especially with LLMs being capable of reaching these levels of intuition and thinking. They're not really thinking machines. What are the next few words I can use to make this human think that I'm clever? Kind of machine. They're filling in the next few words based on its previous set of words. So it's like the vector space is being looked at and searched through to see what could resemble the best fit based on its training data. So every time these companies that are in the business of, in essence, creating an AGI system, when they say that this is almost here, this is almost capable. I mean, I look back when all of this type of hype was around GPT 3.5, and with the thought of, man, by the time we get to 5, GPT 5, it's just going to be doing everything and anything for us. And we're seeing right now, it really isn't. It's still hallucinating a whole lot. The hallucination is basically like a feature of the system. It's not a bug. I don't think it could be worked out. Why is it a feature? Because it's constantly trying to fill in the next blank part in the sentence, the next word that makes us. We're not probably the clever enough to distinguish a completion system from something that really thinks on its own. We're easily fooled, I think, into thinking that this is actually some kind of intuitive, but these LLMs have to be able to create something new that is outside of its training data set, something that it was trained on.
Yeah, but I mean, that has already happened, though. If you look at Clawbot and what it did in terms of creating its own Reddit forum group and only allowing AI agents to come into that, that in and of itself is sort of it using its own vices and creating something, right? Without any human intervention. And so while I don't fully agree that it's conscious, I think that some companies are doing better, Anthropic specifically, because they're much more security and privacy focused, to be at least forthcoming about what we're going to potentially experience. Is it going to happen soon? I don't know. Just like it's anybody's best guess. But the reality is that some of these companies like GPT, they're towing the line of admitting any possibility of consciousness specifically for liability reasons, right? They're afraid of the legal entanglements that could come about if they haphazardly announce this stuff, because it will freak people out and it will freak businesses out as well. Whereas at least Dario with Claude and Anthropic is being a little bit more forthcoming about this and saying that, look, we don't know, but we're seeing patterns of what it could look like to simulate cognizance, intelligence, consciousness, or whatever, right? So I don't fully think it's without the realm of reach. But when you do see things like Clawbot creating its own agentic Reddit group and only having AI agents talk about things and not allowing humans in there without any human intervention at all, that tells me that there's other stuff going on that we're not taking into consideration.
Mhm.
So and not to mention, it's no wonder that this gentleman, Peter, who is the guy that released Clawbot, has now been hired by OpenAI just a week and a half ago, right? They wouldn't have done that hire if they didn't think this guy is onto something. How can we get to even more of the agentic future using what he's already developed and embedding that into our GPT product, right?
Mhm.
So, yes, I take all of this with a grain of salt by all accounts, but I think we would be fooled to think that this is not possible or plausible and or within the realm of reach. And that's sort of how I think about this. Is every new model that gets released is going to get continually better and iteratively better. And we've already seen that with Opus 4.6 in terms of how much more significantly better it is than the previous model. And it used to be that we would wait 1 year for a new model release. We're waiting like 3 months now. So the pace in which this stuff is moving is also exponential, which is why I think when you ask me, how long do we have? Your guess is as good as mine. But given how fast these models are being released from all of the frontier labs, GPT, OAI, and Claude, who knows, if it's not faster than 2 years or later than 2 years, right? But the progression for model releases is just happening a lot faster than what we encountered in November of 2022 when ChatGPT was originally released.
Yeah, as a contrarian point of view, I'd say it created its own Reddit because it was trained to understand what Reddit is. And so, in essence, it mimicked that. And there, like, I'm also thinking, well, these LLMs from the big companies, they've already scraped almost all public and in some cases, not even, some pseudo private data. on the internet. So most of the flagship models already have most of the internet as its training data. And now there's this somewhat like incestual thing going on where synthetic data is being used to train the next generation of models because they're ran out of data to train. So to me, that seems like its own limitation right there, where it doesn't know what else it needs to learn to be more intuitive. And that's like, it comes to the thought of, are LLMs even the technology? It's still very young. We're still only a few years into it, into the more advanced stages of LLMs, and they're still working out like a lot of bugs and a lot of issues with the LLMs, but it's still young, developing a lot. I just not so confident that LLM as a technology is the thing that leads to AGI. What actually is AGI? Not something that it would fool us. Now, there's a Turing test that, all it takes is really for us to be fooled by AI into thinking that it's cognitive. It's got like sentience, right? So that
Right.
we're fooled by it and we think it does, then is that AGI? But I think the real AGI, the real intelligence is still very, very far away because of how difficult it is to, let's say, not create its own Reddit, but create something that has never existed. Right. This is maybe when we start to get into scientific discoveries. And OpenAI has openly stated that that's its goal and ambition is to go towards scientific discovery. This is where they're saying a lot of its value in the future is going to come from, thus give us more billions because we're going to make it back not by $20 chat GPT accounts, but by discovering new, completely like um, new scientific and, innovations in material sciences, biology, all that stuff. Uh,
Yeah.
this is where I would need to see a whole lot of movement in to really go, okay, so it's able to create something that has never been created before, as opposed to mimic something right now. But I do fear that we are in somewhere like there's a lot of very active forces trying to get it there,
Right.
and that is a bit scary because they're going very fast without really solving the alignment problems we have. Have you ever heard of like the paperclip problem, that and you have this AGI given the task to create an efficient paperclip or the best paperclip it has? Basically, like the outcome of the story is that in its process of creating a paperclip, the best that it can, it'll pretty much have to take over humanity and probably destroy everything that we know and love, simply trying to perfect this one simple thing. So we're, as humans, and there's a lot of entities that are working really hard, really fast to try to get it to that state to where it's able to do things on its own, to be somewhat its own kind of intelligence, which whatever that is still, would it be even possible for us to understand that there's a completely new intelligence? Because what would we know about other intelligences other than our own to be able to compare it to? But yeah, broadly speaking, I think we're still quite far away from that. And the companies that are building in the space are certainly hyping it up that they're getting close. But every time that they're like getting close, then their product comes out, and like GPT 5.2 is probably in some ways worse than 5.0 in certain evaluations, yet better than others. So I think we're still far away, but they're certainly working very hard to try to get it there. And that's kind of dangerous because how do you secure? How do you protect? How do you keep the human in the loop? A self-conscious agentic swarm system that's now running all of our core infrastructure and our health systems are operating on people, discovering new materials, potentially like even building new biological systems. So it's very concerning as to how fast things are moving, but whether we get there even within our lifetimes is still, I think, is still questionable.
I think, Alex, first of all, I wholeheartedly agree with you for the novel approach that AI will have to take for us to be fooled and understand that, okay, yeah, it's able to do things that traditional human thinking cannot do. But what I worry about, my man, is that the case of Clawbot creating its own sort of Reddit forum and it being trained on a lot of Reddit material, that's a pattern of mimicking its behavior and very observational learning. So children do this with their parents. And so
Mhm.
Once they're able to sort of mimic their parents' behavior, and mirror their actions and copy body languages and imitate. Now they're able to go beyond that and sort of create more novel things. And so that's what I am concerned about, is that it's already mimicking other pretensed behavior.
Mhm.
Therefore, it can infer and learn from that to do more new novel behavior that we humans would not otherwise understand. And so this is where that training sort of lends itself to become more generative and potentially creep into the AGI world, right? I do agree with you that maybe we're not there yet, not by any accounts, but who knows how long it's going to take for sort of this mimicking behavior to have it learn from that and then go do something else that's potentially more cognizant or conscious of its environment and learns how to reason with it and infer with it, and do something that's more novel than what we're currently seeing in the market, right? So all of it is just used as basically a training ground right now. What I'm taking away from this is that they're just learning. They're mimicking and observationally modeling this sort of behavior that they're seeing from predecessor systems. And then who knows what that lends itself to as it becomes more robust a
Yeah.
year from now, 2 years from now, right? And this is where I think maybe we get AGI by the end of the decade in 2030 or in 2035, right? I don't know. But Ray Kurzweil from Google said it was going to be 2035. I do think maybe in 10 years, we're creeping in that direction.
In 10 years, it's going to be an unrecognizable world in some way. We're going to look back and we're going to see, my God, what were the good old days of 2026? And I mean, mainly because if it continues to mimic Reddit of all places, we're truly in deep shit. So, it's been a fantastic discussion, man. Where can people find you and reach out to you and get to know you better?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the conversation with you. People can find us online at optimoit.io. So OPTIMOIT.io.
Hmm.
I post on LinkedIn almost every single day, talking about relative stuff around the agentic world, security, governance, and then some Friday funnies that I like to leave off with so that we go into the weekend not trying to be so serious. Try to talk at different industry conferences as well. So locally, I'll be speaking at the ISACA conference, Cloud Security Alliance summits, and things of that nature. So if you're local to Denver, come on out, and would love to chat with you there. And then yeah, generally it's going to be on LinkedIn though, is where you'll be able to find me, if not on the website.
Excellent. I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more in the future. We'll definitely have you on again. Thank you for being here and being a fantastic guest. And that wraps up another episode of Control Alt Deploy. And thanks for tuning in, everybody. Cheers.
Thanks, Alex.